Hi, this is Brendan Watkin. This is my FMP for second year film. My FMP this year is called Brendan is Dead. I'll get into that title and why it's not just a weird title. It actually does make sense. So this is my concept presentation. This is kind of like my rough kind of pitch for my film. I'll be going over my film, what I'm wanting to make, why I'm making a short film, and then the kind of creative and practical reason why I'm doing it, this idea and stuff like that, and kind of talk about my influences and kind of give you an overall sense of what is it I'm building. All right. So let's just kind of jump into it. Um, the kind of simple pitch of this film is basically it's a character living in this kind of bubble world, and the bubble world is kind of musically orientated, like Baby Driver and Scott Pilgrim, where it's kind of very visual and stylized. And the kind of part of him, you've got this chunk of him that wants to break out, wants to kind of, realizes that the only way to become better is by breaking out. And the other part is kind of clinging to this world, and it's kind of like about conflict into it. So it's very much a drama with this kind of very surrealist elements. It's very heavily drenched in the film genre. With basically the idea is that like um, whatever song plays is the influence and kind of how the character sees this world. So, for example, if it's a more depressing scene, say that are kind of, there's a spoiler for it later, but there's a song called Creep that might be in the song movie. It's very depressing, so that'd be black and white, very kind of drenched in that kind of color grade. Whereas something a bit more upbeat, that's from 80s style, a VHS style. And the idea is that visually, I thought this was going to be really distinct and really different, and on the more practical side this allows me a lot more freedom in my edit. You know, like last year I done the night shift at 5 minutes at night. The biggest thing with that was color grading to take a look at night. Whereas this is the next step up is how much weird stuff going to get into it. And that's where the really kind of surrealism aspect plays into it. And the other way I'm going to kind of separate these aspects is basically by using two different aspects. So as you can see from this picture here, the bubble world would be orientated in a more kind of cinematic way with this kind of black bars, whereas the normal one would be much more wide. I think that's a really easy way to kind of visually communicate the difference. So another big part of the film is color. As you see, my main theme for this film is purple, and the reason for that is because I feel like, as I was talking about earlier, the two kind of chunks of people. One is going to be in blue, one is going to be in red. Kind of good and evil, that kind of classic visual reminder. And the idea is at the end of the film, or one of the endings, because I'll get into why there's one of the endings in near the end bit. But basically, it comes together to make purple, and I think like purple is also a very distinct color. I went over just in my branding pack and why I chose the colors, but just kind of give you a criteria. On story structure, I will be taking influence from Dan Harmon, who's creator of Rick and Morty, Community, a lot of shows I personally like. And one of the things I really like about him is his story circle. Basically, the idea is that stories will be broken down into 8 parts. You need to go search, find, take, return, change. I'm kind of taking this and kind of slightly adapting, actually turning it into more 7 parts because I feel like, you know, some of these parts can be amounted together. So I'm basically building my story around this because I have problems with story writing. I've talked about my opportunities way back on my website that I really wanted to kind of improve my screenwriting. And I feel like taking influence from someone that I, look up to and someone who's worked in very similar genre to me, very surrealism, very kind of meta would be a good way. So I'm taking very much influence in this kind of story circle. This is kind of break into what basically I'll do is I broke my film into 7 stages. And each kind of a stage is kind of represented by a song and a style, and this way kind of there's a lot to it. So the kind of opening for the film, this is actually where the stem of this idea came from. The idea is it's a very upbeat opening. This is one actually ones I've nailed a song for. This one, Mr. Blue Sky with ELO, and the idea is it's very kind of um, visually distinct, where it's kind of very bright. So there's taking influence on like Ferris Beautiful and very bright, kind of very cinematic. And also Scott Pilgrim, where it's very much like, like a lot of after effects and stuff like this. And the idea is that this kind of plot line is that like they go into the well, they kind of have this upbeat kind of thing, but then the world kind of slashes them, and then you get your first kind of glimpse of the actual real world. It's kind of very depressing. It's much darker color palette, mostly blues, because blue I think is very much for silent depression and stuff like that. And The idea is that on a visual level and so that, this will be very much influenced by the song, so everything will be timed perfectly and so this. And this is kind of the crux of the kind of where the big character is. If you go back to Dan Harmon's story cycle, this is where they kind of get what they need. This is where the need comes in, where they realize that they want something, and the kind of stories about them going to it. I've nicknamed this happy opening. I haven't really worked out much else in there. This kind of the basic idea of this stage being very bright, stuff like that. To go on to the second stage, I call in this I1. I feel like this is kind of what I would call the kind of depression kind of, you know, phase of the character, kind of realizing that, well, what they're getting out of the world isn't good and stuff like that. So if in comparison, this would be much more darker. I'm taking influence from police dramas that use a lot of dark color palettes, but I think the best example of this one I'm looking for is Ozark. There's a crime kind of thriller. Basically, it uses a very like, gritty blue color grade, and you can see the difference from these, like, you know, just these two scenes, is that they immediately visually show this kind of thing. And I'm kind of looking at songs like Mr. Lonely, I Want Love, and things like that. I've really nailed down the song for this, and there's a theme throughout. It's kind of very rough planning, but that kind of visual level would be kind of very blue and stuff like that, and be use the same aspect ratio. And this is where the character kind of starts kind of, as I was talking about, kind of going into the suppressive spiral, and this is where we meet the antagonist, or the, I would say, secondary character. I don't think it's very here clean cut as good and bad, but it's kind of this voice in his head that's trying to get him to kind of, you know, accept the reality, the real world reality, and he's kind of further gone down to it. So then stage 3, sorry, it's what I'm calling a music argument. Basically, the idea is that this kind of, the voices has kind of grown to the point where it kind of has its own taste and music, and kind of they get into an argument about this. Basically, the character, the kind of main character is very much still in this depressive, well represented by Creep, that as I was talking about earlier, it's a very depressing song. Whereas on the other side, this other kind of new or emerged character wants to break from this reality, very much more upbeat and kind of using more 80s, 90s songs, sorry. 90s and 80s songs like Break My Stride, Wake Me Up Before You Go Go, to kind of visually do this. So the idea is that the scene will keep cutting between them. So one point you'll have, like, you know, Creep visuals that'll be very bright, very wide, kind of very kind of black and white. Whereas on the other side you'll have like Break My Stride visuals that'll be kind of very 80s style. It'll be visually kind of like, you know, very much VHS style, as you can see in this picture. It would be short aspect ratios for that. And the idea is I haven't really worked out how the beats would go, but I think my idea is a final shot is kind of dividing it and showing this kind of really big divide between them by having one side be one side, one and be the other. And I think that would be really cool visual. So that's kind of the idea for stage 3. I'm calling music diagram. Stage 4 is what I'm calling nightmare time. This is kind of where the really big surrealist suite phase into it. And it's basically a dream sequence. And it's going to be visually very distinct. It's taking a lot of influence, especially from the boat scene from Willy Wonka. It's this haunting. But the idea is that the character going to do as if rift in stage 3, as I talked about, because of the music argument plays out. The characters kind of have this natural conflict, and now the characters have this kind of hellish kind of dream sequence. And I really like the idea. It's a very different, a lot of the different visuals, kind of very big colors, and really kind of making this really surreal and so this. This is the least planned out stage on it, just because it's very much, I need to think about more what visuals I want to use and stuff like that. I have many ideas like POV shots, puppet shots, things like that to really play into this paranoia of the character. And then the idea is stage 5 is after the rift is formed, the kind of characters are broken off. And this kind of separation has happened. This character kind of goes further into the delusion. And I feel like the best way to do that distinctly is I'm basically going to, there's a director I really like called Wes Anderson, and he has such a unique style. So you can see the pictures. He's done Grand Budapest Hotel, he's done Bottle Rocket, he's done The French Dispatch, he's done Fantastic Mr. Fox, tons of great films. But his biggest thing is such a distinct and colourful style. And I feel like the character trying to further going into their illusion, the world kind of comes more flavoured and more like, because the character is very much into films, like films, so very much Wes Anderson. So this will take influence from from a song point of view. This will be either very much Wes Anderson songs. I'm kind of looking through his catalogue to try and find the best song for it. But songs like Here Comes My Baby and Me and Julia Down the Schoolyard, very upbeat. Obviously, it's taking influence from Wes Anderson, visual style for like a lot of perfect framings. You see, he uses a lot of kind of rule of thirds, good framing, and a lot of colours, and really just kind of working at the colour grading. The idea of stage 6 is that like the character, the antagonist of the story has kind of come back and realized that like, you know, the world is kind of, this character is not healthy in the world, and kind of this very kind of brutal fight breaks out, very much influenced by as you can see in here, Climax. That is a very much very visual film where you read and saw that. And it's very set to Bohemian Rhapsody. This is another one of the songs that I've definitely now done because I think it's a perfect kind of insanity fight song to really play into those elements. And the idea is that like it kind of this fight breaks out that kind of ends in you either the audience actually getting to choose, and this was a very late edition, but to kill or spare, leading to two different endings. The reason I chose two different endings was because I really like both endings. I think they're both interesting ideas, and I think playing into like that surrealist element, playing into a very kind of meta nature of this film, I feel like it'd be cool and interesting if the audience were how to choose and stuff like that. And I feel like it's a unique thing to go into it. So again, this will be very kind of visual. It'll be very much like stage 4, the dream sequence, where it's very much very surrealist and stuff like that. And it kind of has this big argument. So Bohemian Rhapsody starts off with this big kind of 2 songs, and the first chunk of that song is going to be this big argument. The second chunk is going to be the story, and that's where the so the fight, that's where the kind of screenplay that I wanted to improve comes into it. So yeah, as I was saying, there's going to be 2 endings. The first ending will be spare. I call this the upbeat ending. And the idea is that the character kind of spares him, and he kind of naturally starts to grow out of this world. So it's kind of much more upbeat. It's taking out influence from Julian. The idea is that they're not completely broken from this music bubble, but they're kind of healthily getting out of it. And it's kind of visually done by like Collision, for example. Pronouncing that terribly, but you can see it's different. It's very different from Anderson type, Wes Anderson films. It's more natural and stuff like that. So I think that really plays into that. And the idea is that like they're wearing purple, that's to represent the kind of culmination of 2 people into one, and the kind of film ends with them just kind of walking away from the camera, getting further away from the camera to visually represent that kind of, you know, divide. And I think that's really interesting on a visual level. A lot to talk about that. Obviously, as this is just a concept presentation, I'm really worked out the stage, but I feel like this is more upbeat. It's meant to be more like that. I'm looking at really kind of light songs like Wild Me Off or 4th of July that are very kind of light and simple. And then you have the kill option. And I call this the existential nightmare option. The idea is that if you kill the person, it kind of it goes into the song "Are You Happy?" That is this really interesting Bo Burnham song from his song. His show Make Happy. And the idea of the song is this kind of reflection of the character's kind of mental health and the kind of world they're in and stuff like that, and like how they're kind of questioning their happiness. And the idea of this is the kind of character has kind of come prisoner to this music bubble. So instead of healthily dealing with their issues, they've kind of come a prisoner. That's kind of a lot to read into. But I think that's a really interesting idea. And the idea of this is it's very much visually different. As you can see, it's the classic Quiet and Darkness thing. This is going to be very much visually taken from Bo Burnham as a artist, I think, in this whole section, which I love so much. It's going to be visually very much like Bo Burnham. Taking instances Inside Show, where it's very dark and it's a lot of like kind of performance. And the idea is that the character kind of, you know, the screen glitches for a second, you just see them break and then they come back and it's like back to this music bubble world. So now they're like prisoners of this music bubble one. I think that's a really interesting idea. So why did I pick this concept? This is a pretty out there concept. I've just gone down 7 stages, 8 stages technically about it. So I just put 2 in depth. I just really have a unique idea for this kind of thing. And it's one of those things where, as you can see, each stage has just such a unique color and grading, music and stuff like that. But, you know, like as I talk about on the creative side, there's a lot of creative freedom. I really am a person who loves a lot of creative freedom. I don't like being boxed into one idea. I really like this kind of creative freedom. It allows me to really kind of do like whatever I want, kind of. And there's a lot of different techniques like this. And then the other side, on the other side, so this is a perfect creative opportunity to really experiment with how music works, because music is a massive part of it. I've always loved music, and I've never really been able to really experiment with how music works, but this is such a big part of music. So you see each stage is broken up by a song, and each song really kind of is meant to be perfectly timed. There's obviously stages that are a bit more perfect timed, but the happy opening is going to be a good example of the perfectly timed music, like the beats going to be perfectly timed to the character to really play into this kind of, you know, music bubble world. Let's talk about more from a business kind of practical side. On a practical side, this concept allows me to do like a lot of unique editing and really push you into my editing skills. Because as I've even talked about in these stages, there is a lot of editing really involved in this. There's a lot of color grading, transitioning, really kind of nailing down these transitions. And this is going to be a challenge on for definite. I know just working on one color grade, and that's difficult, but working with multiple can be incredibly difficult. And trying to replicate different styles, trying to replicate Anson, stuff like that. It's a big challenge, I'll admit. And that's why I've really taken it. I could have made, I think one of my ideas for a movie was The Target. That's going to be a very generic thriller. And I think I worked for thrillers and worked up, but this is actually a big challenge. And that's what I really like about it. And, you know, obviously the musical argument, I think it's going to be my most unique stage because it's really kind of transitioning quickly between two different styles, and I can make it jarring and really play into that nature. And then, as I talked about way back on my website, one of the things I really wanted to get out of this project was improve my screenwriting skills. I always feel like my screenwriting is very weak. I mostly don't really use the script. You know, Night Shift barely had a script, much of visuals how it is. But because of this, how much conflict involved, this is going to be a big script. As I mentioned in the Bohemian fight, part of the lead up to the fight is a big kind of argument. That's going to be very much scripted. So I'll look at, like, you know, authors, I'll look at Blake Snyder, who I've done a really interesting book on. David Cat, I'll look at other screenplay writers, Aaron Sorkin, things like that. I'm really trying to nail down that screenwriting. So on a practical level, I think like this concept really allows me to really explore that creative freedom and also have that kind of challenge. So overall, kind of giving overall why I picked this concept in one simple phase is because it's a challenge. I don't want to do something easy that I can just get distinction, like a merit. I want to go for that distinction and I know how to challenge myself. So talk about influences. One of the big influences is obviously Baby Driver. I think I talked about this before, but basically Baby Driver is this film by Edgar Wright, who also directed Scott Pilgrim. That's a big influence in the Mr. Blue Sky section. The idea is Baby Driver, all the visuals are perfectly timed. Music is a big part of it, much like this film, and much like the first stage, really much a big reference to that. I'm going to a bit more of an artsy side, but on something different. The name Brendan is Dead isn't just a depressing name for the sake of it. It's actually a reference to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. Basically, it's his place centering on Hamlet characters who are side characters in the Hamlet show, but now they're a focus, and it's very much this film that questions your existence and what you're doing in this world and why you're there and if you matter at all. And I think this really plays into the character's kind of anxiety about where they are and stuff like that. It's very much a metaphorical kind of thing. And on just the name of the line, Brendan is dead, the idea is that at the end of the film, he is either dead in two ways. He's dead inside because he's kind of sucked in this music bubble world, or he's dead because he's kind of formed with this other character and become a new person and no longer Brendan. The reason I use my own name because I'll be honest, I thought it just sounded cool. I think Heartwork name looked better, and I thought it looked really personal. I may change this. It may be Barry is dead or something like that, but I really like the title Brendan is dead, so I just kind of done to it. And also it'd be helpful in the writing sense for a roast gods, gives dead to write interesting, compelling characters who are side characters and who are kind of feel like they're side characters. Another big influence is Scott Pilgrim, as I mentioned before, on visual levels, visually across the film, how kind of those visuals kind of play into it and how music is represented visually. Another big influence is Tick Tick Boom by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who done Hamilton, stuff like that, and Andrew Garfield stars in it about Jonathan Larson. And I really like how it's able to transition between different styles. I think there's one big scene that I really liked. There's actually a big crux influence of this film, where basically it goes into the play game song, and it's very much in a VHS style thing, and it very perfectly transitions. And I think that's a good influence for me personally, is transitioning between these different styles. So I don't want it to feel jarring most of the time. I think sometimes stuff feel jarring because it's so into elements, but I feel like natural transitions are really help flow the story better. So to influence from Tick Tick Boom, I'm thinking about like how do I naturally transition into different scenes. Obviously, this is a Swedish film, so I'm going to be taking a lot of influence from Swedish films. So you know, you look like Requiem for a Dream, Eraserhead, Charlie in the Chocolate Factory. These are all kind of another Charlie in the Chocolate Factory. The folks in Charlie and Chocolate Factory, but these are all kind of the Requiem for a Dream and Eraserhead had a big surrealist films, and I really want to take influence from their visuals and how they're able to make visuals have meaning. So you know, obviously other movies, Eyes Wide Shut would be another one, but I feel like it's easy just to make stupid visuals. But if there's visuals and meaning, I think that really helps. The story I'm trying to tell is very fun and meaningful. So I think taking influence from these films that obviously aren't just weird for the sake of it, they're kind of a deep meaning's really good. Okay, so this is my mood board. I won't really go into this too much, but to basically break it down is blue, red, and purple. Those are the colors of the character. Green is kind of a very big part of the film because it's mostly set outdoors. Baby Driver, obviously, big influence, and then obviously these are to represent the different kind of things. And then finally, here's a visual kind of mood board. So this is Baby Driver that I was talking about before. As you can see, I don't know if you can hear this, but basically all of the actions on the screen are perfectly timed to the music. There's a massive influence on it. And I really like how this scene kind of plays out, and tension and stuff like this, and how each kind of aspect of the real world plays into it. And on the other side, this is a Swedish film, so the biggest influence I'll take, another big influence I'll take is this kind of just nightmare sequence from 2001, one of the greatest movies ever made, where it uses so much raw colour and really just flexes the audience, and that will really help with the surrealist scenes, especially these surrealist scenes that are in for the dream sequence, where it's meant to be very visually insane and stuff like this, and using all these bright colours, and you've got like the eye, and it's so surrealist and weird. I think that will really help play into a film. And I think that's the end of my PowerPoint. I'll just make sure. Yep. So that was Brendan is Dead. This is a very overall, very unique idea. That's why I chose it. I really like it. It's going to be a much more challenge like that. But I feel like it gives me the perfect opportunity to really step up. And I think that's the best part of it. So thank you for watching Brendan is Dead concept PowerPoint.